Hello, and welcome to a special Facebook Live presentation on the Cook County Assessor's Office's Rogers Park Valuations Reports. I'm Scott Smith, the Chief Communications Officer. With me are Samantha Simpson, Chief Data Officer, and Fritz Kaegi, the Cook County Assessor. Tonight, Fritz and Samantha will have a brief presentation about the results of the assessment of Rogers Park Township, the first of 8 township areas in the city of Chicago that will be reassessed this year. We're sure you'll have a lot of questions about assessments, so please leave us a comment and we'll try to get to as many as we can during our Q&A section. And we'll also have staff members from the office available to answer questions as well. In the 2021 reassessment process, the Assessor's Office determines the fair market value of residential and commercial properties throughout the city of Chicago. Essentially, we determine what that property would sell for in the current real estate market. It's important to remember that just because your property's assessment goes up doesn't mean your property taxes will go up. And if other properties' assessments increase more than yours, this can shrink your home share of property taxes. Your property share will depend on 2021 reassessments throughout Chicago, from homes in Chatham and Jefferson Park to commercial properties in Little Village or the Loop. The work of the Assessor's Office is based on real estate market activity. And so to get into the details of what we found in Rogers Park, we're going to start with Cook County Assessor Fritz Kaegi.
Hey, thanks, Scott. And one of the things we're trying to do is give you a different look from the assessor's office for how we do our work and to explain how it works and how it relates to you. And this is new, a Facebook Live event where the assessor and our team, we come to you from our homes to explain to you how the assessment and property tax system works. So here we are. We're going to be laying out the groundwork for how the model works, but Samantha and I and Scott, we all grew up in Chicago, and we know that there's a lot of folklore about where assessments come from. When you go to a picnic or a backyard block party, back when those things were still a thing and they're just starting to come back, oftentimes you'd hear things about how assessments work that could be a little bit different from the reality. Like some people think that, one time I heard, hey, Fritz, should I renovate my basement or should I renovate my attic? Could that change my assessment and raise my property taxes? This is one of those things we want to address, that basically one of the things that we look at when we value your home, almost never should you avoid doing something like a renovation because it could change your assessment. I know in other neighborhoods, sometimes people ask, hey, there's all this new construction in my neighborhood. Is that raising my assessment? And I think Samantha will be here to tell you that actually the way our model looks at, we try to look at things apples for apples. So a new construction probably wouldn't affect the value of an older home in quite the way that you think. So these are one of the reasons why we wanted to talk with Samantha, who's the head of our team that does these values, to sort of let you know, hey, here's how assessment modeling works. Here's how these values work. We just want to demystify it here a little bit for you. So we're going to talk today about a residential and commercial property, so you can see what goes in globally to our assessments, both in Rogers Park and in the rest of the city. So Samantha, your team has worked closely with our valuation department in trying to change the models and change the approach that we have for residential assessments. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges that we faced in doing this when we came in, our administration? And the last Chicago assessment was in 2018, and we've really had to rebuild the models from the ground up to make them more accurate and equitable. What did all this involve?
Yeah, so well, first let's talk a little bit about the model, just to make sure that everyone that's watching is aware. I think sometimes it can be an internal term. So our model is basically a computerized statistical model, and we use it to help us get real estate market data to estimate the value of homes that haven't sold yet. And so what our team, the data team, is doing is we're basically taking available information out there using modern technology to predict home prices. So when we talk about the model, that's what we mean. Now, in 2018, we walked into essentially the industry standards of what the model looked like. And that was very linear. We were applying data based on townships instead of looking at the county as a whole. There was a lot of code, very outdated. And what we decided to do was to shift from the industry standard and lean more towards mirroring the market, which is something you talk about often and where we really want to be. And we want to make sure that we are current with the times. So what we did was we changed up our technical approach. Instead of just applying a linear model, we use a linear model as a baseline. But we have some new software that we're using. And for those who are aware and know what that is, it's called Light GBM. And it's essentially a decision tree that helps us do a little more predictive learning with the model. We can recognize complex patterns faster. And we can predict a home's sale price based on its characteristics with learned patterns. So it's a huge improvement from where we were. It allows us to apply our standards and our statistics with more rigor. And it takes into consideration a number of characteristics, which is also a big distinction from 2018 to 2021. Now that we've changed up how we're doing things, we can put more emphasis on location. We can think about the specific characteristics that are applied in the model. So square footage, rooms, the construction quality, and other characteristics have a huge impact on the fair market value, even school districts, right? So we can apply all of those things, and it really helps us get a more accurate and fair value to the market. And I want to throw in there, it's so awesome that we have this opportunity and this tech available to us to be able to do some predictive learning with the model. We also have an amazing staff of analysts who are going back in to look at that in our process called desk review to ensure that if there are any distinctions or any outliers, that we're catching those as well.
And Samantha, when you mentioned industry standard before, this is not industry standard in the good sense.
Correct.
This is just what people typically do without thinking more about what the disparate local impact is, right? So, like when you talk about a linear industry standard, it's kind of like rules of thumb that people use because it was convenient before, but it wasn't necessarily appropriate to different parts of Chicago. And a lot of studies have shown that there were biases that were built into those standards. And this is why we try to take this additional approach that you talked about, right?
That's right. And we're always looking for new approaches. And we are growing. We're trying to get more high quality data, which is really important to how we can make sure that we are meeting fairness across the entire county and that we are living our truth of wanting to have equitable assessments for the entire county. Yeah, so it's a very fascinating place to be. But before we continue on with residential, Fritz, I know you are so well versed in what's happening in commercials as well. So I figured you can give us some insight on commercial assessments.
Sure, and I know a lot of folks out there. Most people aren't really interested in commercial. Most people are out there are just interested in their home. But here's why we're talking about both. Whether you own residential or commercial, we're all in the same boat because it's your share of the total assessed value in the city of Chicago that determines your share of property taxes. So if we're getting residential right, if we're getting your property right, we could still be doing you wrong if we're not assessing commercial right. Commercial could be underassessed and you could be making up the difference, as could your neighbors. So that's why it's important that we get both of these pieces right and we think about this larger context. So what we're doing with commercial properties is we take on the same mandate and duty that Samantha talked about. We're supposed to mirror the market. The assessment system exists so that we are dividing up the property tax levies amongst all of us fairly in accordance with market values. And so with commercial, the challenge is a little bit different because what Samantha and our residential team looked at, and residential are lots and lots of transactions on many, many different parcels. And although their locations and individual homes can be different, they have many things that are similar. And so we can run the complex models that Samantha's team does to value those. But in commercial, it's different. We have fewer transactions, fewer parcels, and the commercial parcels are also different from each other. A car wash is different from an auto dealership, is different from a warehouse, is different from an office building. And so we need to look at those differently. And also we need to look at them differently because the market looks at them differently. Many commercial real estate markets look at what kind of income a building might throw off from its rent or its use. So then what we look at is what are the different drivers that would drive a building's ability to generate income? So that would be its rent. How much would it rent per square foot typically? How expensive is it to operate the building? Many different buildings have different rates of expense if they're old or new, they're inefficient or efficient. We also look at their occupancy. Some kinds of commercial buildings have trouble getting 90% occupied. Others don't. And it differs from neighborhood to neighborhood. So these are all the different things that we think about because that's what investors think about. And what we started with when we came in 2018 before this reassessment is that there are a lot of studies that showed that commercial assessments in the city of Chicago and the county as a whole were really dramatically underassessed. If you looked at the transactions that happened in commercial properties in 2018, the last year there was a reassessment, the assessed values versus those properties that transacted were about 50% under where they were assessed. Actually, assessments were 50% under where they transacted at 2018 in the city, and about 40% under where they transacted at as a whole in the county. So that's from the International Association of Assessing Officers, which is the gold standard in our industry, the experts on this. They did this study, and that's what they found. And that means we're just serving all the other people who pay property taxes when we get it that far off. The other thing is that we found that there were disparities within the commercial, and so we have to make sure that we're focused on getting it right for the smaller commercial properties, which tend to be overassessed versus the bigger commercial properties. So what do we do? How can you find out if we're doing a better job on this than we were before, and how are we coming up with our assessments? So what we do is we publish all of our assessment assumptions online for rents, for expenses, and for vacancies. And we publish online those different assumptions for different kinds of commercial properties. So you can see these in our commercial valuation reports that we'll be talking about. But before we get to that, let's take a look at the residential assessment reports for everyone who wants to dig into this, and then we'll do the commercial. So Sam, can you pull one of those up for us?
Sure. We will go to our website. And just for awareness, you can find this information at cookcountyassessor.com under the data tab, and you'll see valuation reports. When you click on that, that'll take you to all of our reports. Right now, you can see Rogers Park Township is available. And here's information. And here we give a high level overview of the modeling reports. And again, this is where our predictive modeling has come in. And we provide reports for single family homes, multifamily homes, and condos. And thinking about a distinction from 2018 as well, Fritz. In the past, the three of these were combined into one report. And now we found that it is more valuable to distinguish the three of them. So some interesting things to see is that in this first page, the single family homes, we know that there are 5,600 single family homes in Rogers Park. 216 of them were sold in 2020. And the range of that from the bottom third and the top third sold for $330,000 to $460,000. And what our model predicted in 2021 Our estimated bottom third was 320,000, and our estimated top third was 410,000. So this is where our modeling has led us to, and really doing a better job in how we look at the city and the county at large. In the report itself, this covers a lot of the specifics of what our model does. So it's a report about the market itself. The model and results are in there, some additional statistics that do talk about this distinction between 2018 and 2021. There's also information about property taxes and appeals. Oftentimes, Fritz, as you know, people come to our office for lots of different things that our partners in the property tax administration handle. So we call that out in this report. And then all of the juicy details can be found in the appendix as well. So let's dig into Rogers Park a little bit. Let's talk about the market report itself. One thing to really look at and to highlight is the median sales. I find it very interesting, and Fritz, curious about what you think, that our market is continuously growing here in Chicago. So the median income the median sale price has increased. You can see that in this dark green squiggly line that's going up. And here we are in 2020, where you can see that the median sale price is $380,000 for 2022 or 2020. When we think about that and kind of try to boil that down to the neighborhood level, we can see that the different ranges. So for those of you in a certain area of Rogers Park that are curious of what's happening on your particular block or in your neighborhood and what that means for you and the value of your home, you can identify what's sold around you, and see how that assessment impacts you, right? I think it's pretty cool to drill into the top third and the bottom third. Some of the fun facts, as we have listed here, are the top sale price in Rogers Park was $1.2 million, but we also have a number of homes, that are not in that range. And so our model will look at the distinctions between those things and what the characteristics we've applied, and how we look at what improvements were made, what sales were made. We can make a more accurate assessment so that higher end homes don't affect the assessment value of lower end homes. So this is a really awesome thing that we think we're producing for each neighborhood. We're going to do this for every township in Chicago. And one of the things that I think is really important to note is that for Rogers Park and for the entire county, we look at the International Association of Assessing Officers statistics and their best practices. And we use that as a barometer to determine how well we're doing. And it's interesting for us in that now in 2021, we've hit all of the metrics in Rogers Park. We met all three metrics for high quality assessments here. And that just shows that the changes to our model, this predictive learning and this predictive machine learning, in addition to the work that our team does, is really helping us meet accurate assessments and to be more fair in what the assessed value of homes in Cook County look like. And so I think on the residential side, these improvements are really healthy for us, and we're looking forward to continue to grow. One of the other things that I'm really proud of is, as we've talked about, this information is available online. It is transparent. We also produce our code online for the model. We also want to make sure that it's not only available or understandable to folks in tech and the data community. So we're making a few tweaks right now for style and format, and we will post this to the county's open data site as well, so that anyone in Cook County, folks in Rogers Park can see the actual data and get some insight into how our office is working and improving.
And Samantha, one of the reasons why we do this is not only to show and be transparent, but also to be humble so we can identify those times when we don't get it right? Like, we know that everyone knows more about their own house than we do. We are a group of a couple hundred people trying to value 1.9 million properties, and we value it only based on the data that we have. So the models are only as good as the data that goes in them, and we know that we operate with incomplete data sometimes. So this is why you and your team, you're always on the lookout for identifying areas where we can improve. We post the code because we know that the community out there can help us isolate things to improve too. Fritz,
I'm so glad you brought that up. You mentioned earlier that there are some reports out there that talk about, our assessed values and how that affects property taxes. And what we believe is that for sure we can continue to do a better job and improve on our model with better data. And so sharing information about the quality and condition of the home is really important to us, making sure that we get the value right, that we can accurately assess values. And we do have limitations. So we can see we have information about the outside of homes, but interior characteristics are really important to us to actually know. So, are there really 3 bedrooms? Is it 2 bedrooms? Is there a new bathroom? Is the condition of the bathroom, not usable? All that information helps us really determine the attributes, characteristics, and to help us better assess properties, which is where we want to be. So high quality data is what we are striving for, and as much of it so that everyone has an accurate and fairly assessed value to their property.
Yeah, and you talked about those IAAO standards for equity and fairness that we met, and we've really reduced the regressivity where the lower third tends to be more valued, more highly valued versus the upper third, and we've reduced that. But we want to get that flat, right? We want to make sure that we're getting things so we're really eliminating any kind of biases. And one of the areas is getting that better quality data and continuing to improve, right?
That's right. And I think what you said, like really stressing, oftentimes where we see disparity, and when inequity exists is when we're looking at that lower third or the lower ends of the homes. And we've done a good job in improving how we're assessing properties for the top third and even the middle and at the median. But what I think is really special and exciting for us is that we've improved how we are assessing the bottom third, which typically has not happened historically. Historically, those of us who live in homes who aren't valued as high as other homes in our communities, it can be overassessed, and then there are concerns, right, about how does this affect my property taxes. And one of the other things that I think it's important for us to share, especially in thinking about our partners in property tax administration, is a change to your assessed value, whether you improve the condition of your home or you share additional information about the interior characteristics of your home. A change in your assessment does not mean that is going to be a change to your property tax bill. It really does depend on the tax levy, the taxing districts, and the tax rate. Our role is to provide the assessed value, and that's just a piece of the equation to determine what property taxes will look like. So again, it's more of what your share is of the value of your home. And just because you add a bedroom and your assessed value goes up, that does not necessarily mean that you're going to see a significant increase or any increase in your property tax bill. It really does depend on the levy itself. So I think we've covered residential a bit. I know we'll probably have some questions coming up, but like Fritz, let's go through the commercial side and the commercial report that we put out for Rogers Park.
Sure. Okay, so here's what we saw. Remember in commercial that there are a bunch of different sectors which are all very different from each other. But first, let's look at multifamily. What do we mean by multifamily? Multifamily, those are the bigger apartment buildings. So more than 7 units and above. And they're different from the many, 2 flats, 4 flats, 6 flats, the residential multifamily, which are 6 units or less. So here we have information that you can see about what happened in Rogers Park. And first of all, let's look at the different kinds of multifamily property here. I think that's because the market treats them differently. So we have, you'll see here on the left-hand side that there's an institutional group, a regional group, neighborhood A, and neighborhood B. Institutional, these are usually basically the largest apartment buildings. You can see it's 38 to 158 units in this case. So a lot of these are really, very, multiple stories, quite large buildings, typically owned by a big institutional investor. Buildings like this are typically worth in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And then in regional, we have 321 buildings like that. These are ones that are sort of 8 units to 171, but they're a little bit higher end. They're a little bit newer. Tend to be run by the more professional managers. In these kinds of buildings trade in a different way from what typically a mom and pop managed apartment building would trade in the neighborhood A level. So the 7 to 40 units, older buildings. Some of them might be walk-ups where you wouldn't have an elevator, or they might not have central air conditioning. So these all have different characteristics, and you can see what kind of rents that we assume for each of these different kinds of buildings. So you can see the range of rents that we have here that we're putting in our model. You can also see the vacancy that we assumed at 9%. Vacancy is larger than you typically expect in an apartment building, but we increased the vacancy rate assumption because of the effects of COVID. Also, you see the expense ratio. So this is what it costs to manage a building like this. You can see that we know those neighborhood A buildings are a little bit more expensive to manage, oftentimes because they are not as big and efficient. They have might not be heated as well. There might be other sorts of things that make them a little bit more expensive to operate. Maybe they don't have some of their older buildings that are just more expensive to maintain. And you can see, what is this cap rate? Well, this is a measure that market participants know. Many of you might not know what that is, but if you divide the annual income by the cap rate, that translates to what kind of value this property might trade in the market. So for a 5% cap rate, if it was generating $10 million of income at a 5% cap rate, that building would be worth $200 million, just for an example. And then you can see the different cap rates here. The cap rates tend to get higher as you see them being in different classes. And this reflects the fact that the market puts a lower price generally on income that's generated by older, smaller buildings. And then you can see over on the right-hand side how we're valuing them per unit. So for those institutional class properties, basically using the assumptions that we put in there, we're estimating the value of a unit is somewhere between $117,000 to $178,000 per unit. And then you can see down as you go lower on the quality scale, it starts at $52,000 per unit and then down to $47,000 per unit. You can also see that in this neighborhood A category, it includes a couple of affordable housing buildings where we explicitly use a different valuation approach because these buildings have different conditions for ownership. Typically, they're marking rent to the level of income of the tenant, and they have different limitations on what they can be sold at. So we value those buildings differently. And here you can see the assumptions that we used, where that rent per unit is a little bit lower than you'd see in other comparable buildings. And you can see it has an expense ratio that's much higher that reflects the fact that these buildings are limiting the amount that they're charging on their rent while having to pay the same operating expense. And so you can see the assumptions that we use in valuing those affordable housing buildings as well. So this is a good example of the level of detail that we give you on showing how we got to the numbers. And these are the very same things that market participants would look at. We have other reports that you can see here on office, so on retail, and on other commercial properties where we go through all the different assumptions. And again, we do this for the same reason that we put our code online for residential, which is not only to be transparent in showing how we arrived at these numbers, but in those situations where we're not getting it right, we can identify and drill down to where the difference is from what you as a property owner might see versus what we've assumed. And this can happen. We assume a rent that you might not be able to get for a commercial property in a certain place. Or we assume a level of occupancy that is different from the market level of occupancy for the kind of market that we're looking at. Or maybe we assume that it's less expensive to operate a building like that than what you're actually experiencing. And so we find that commercial property owners are really well served to submit to us information about this stuff before we send out our assessment so we can take it into account. Every commercial property owner will have received in the mail a real property income and expense form, or RPI form, where they can tell us this information before we send out the assessments. And I know we did have some folks in Rogers Park who did that, and I think they were well served by it. So before we get, so you can find all of these valuation reports in the data section of our website. If you go to the data section of our website and then click on the valuation reports, you can drill down into as much detail as you want. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I know a lot of folks like to know what's going on in the neighborhood. Go ahead and have at it. But before we get into the Q&A, here are a couple of other things to keep in mind. First of all, these numbers that we have here will change after the appeals process because, again, we know that we are not perfect. We put these numbers out there to show you how we got there, but we are making these assessments with limited information. Sometimes the information we have on your house or on your property is wrong. Maybe we overestimated what you think your house can sell for. You know your house better than we do. That is 100% for sure. You can go to cookcountyassessor.com/appeals for information on how to appeal and to show us that data for where we might not have gotten something right. Also, please remember, Rogers Park is only 2% of the total assessed value of Chicago. So just because there are increases here doesn't mean all of Rogers Park's tax bills will go up, because what matters in Rogers Park for commercial property owners or for homeowners is not only what happened to your assessment, but what's happening to assessed value in the rest of the city. So this is just the beginning of the story. It affects your property, but your tax bill will be affected by how other people are assessed in Chicago as well. And we will continue to give you that information in as much detail as you want as we finish up each part of the city. So, Sam, how about I hand this to you and to Scott?
Well, I think we've covered residential and commercial.
And we do have a couple of questions, so I think we're going to jump right to those. So,
okay, all right.
The biggest misconception, I think, as you both know, is how assessments and property taxes relate. And so, Fritz, maybe you could talk a little bit about, somebody gets an assessment, maybe that assessment goes up 30% or 50% based on the market over the past 3 years. And, certainly there are home sale prices that have gone up, post-COVID. But how does that then relate to what happens with the levy and the tax rate? How do you explain to somebody who's looking at a 50% increase on an assessment and is wondering, well, how is it possible that my taxes are not going to go up 30 to 50%?
Sure. This is a really good thing to focus in on. The thing to remember, especially if you've moved from another part of the country where it works a little bit differently, but even if you haven't, the system is a little non-intuitive. The way things work in Illinois and in Cook County and in Chicago is the amount that has to be collected in terms of dollars across the whole system is determined in advance. So it's about, give or take, $15 or $16 billion in Cook County overall. It's a little bit more than $8 billion in the city of Chicago. So that's the cost of government. That's the property. Think of that as the property tax cost of government. That's schools. And it's mostly schools, but also the cost of running the city, the parks, water, the MWRD, the libraries, all of that. If you live in Chicago, it's a little bit more than $8 billion on the property tax side. How do we divide this amount that has to be paid each year amongst all the property owners? That's where assessments come in. So assessments are used to determine your share of that $8 billion that has to be paid every year. The way we do this is it's your assessment divided by the total assessed value in the city. And so there are a couple things that determine your property tax bill. If your assessment goes up, what you also need to know is how much is total assessed value in the city changing, because it's your share of the total assessed value that really determines your property tax. So if your assessment goes up 20%, but everyone else's assessment also goes up 20%, and the total assessed value goes up 20%, your share has not changed in that instance, just in that very simple instance. It could still go up if that annual amount that has to be collected every year is going up, but it doesn't. It goes up usually by a couple of percentage points each year. So that is why you can't just look at what happened in your assessment, because our rates in this state are not fixed. We back into the rate by determining what is your share of assessed value, and then we look at the levy, and that determines that. So it's a little complicated. I wish it wasn't so complicated. We should have a simpler system, but it's the system that we have. And the key thing for everyone to know is your assessed value is not the end of the story. It's really the thing that's really important to know is what happened to total assessed value in the city, because that determines the rate that you pay. So let's assume your assessment does not change, but let's assume the city's assessed value doubles. Okay. In that case, the rate would fall for you, and so that's why it's important to know not only look at your own assessment, but what's going on in the rest of the city. The assessor's office is typically not talked about this, so a lot of people don't know. Even people who are steeped in real estate and in making policy don't really understand this. So if it sounds like a word salad to you, I understand. This is why we're trying to do events like this and put more information out there to help you.
So let's also talk a little bit about, we've got these things in the county that are called townships, and people who are in the suburbs are really familiar with townships because they might go to the township for various services. But in Chicago, townships aren't really a form of government that most people are used to. They're used to, city hall, and maybe they're used to the county offices, but we still have townships in Chicago. And the unique thing I think about the city is that you aren't just looking about what happens in your geographical township. You have to be thinking about all of the different townships. So when people are hearing that, there's going to be assessments coming from West Township or Hyde Park Township or North or South Township, why is that important? Why should they be paying attention to what happens in another township? And why is it that they don't have to worry about just what might be going on in taxing districts within their immediate geographic area?
Sure. We use townships purely as a cartographical convenience. It's a place on a map. It's not even in Chicago. There is no township form of government. It's a place on a map because Chicago is so big. We send out assessments piece by piece, and because of the way land was originally organized in Illinois, you have these areas in dividing up the land that are known as townships. And so we start with Rogers Park Township, which is just a place in Chicago that helps us to delineate a group of parcels, and then we'll send out those assessments bit by bit every year based on purely, we don't want to send out the whole of the city at the same time. We're just starting with that area. So it's purely a geographical area of convenience, but we don't want that geographical area of convenience to drive things like how we model and how we determine the property values, because the market doesn't do that. So it is purely a thing that's convenient for us in deciding when we send out assessments piece by piece. For a taxpayer, what really matters is thinking about what is the total assessed value in the city of Chicago, because that is how you are splitting the cost of government with all other property owners in Chicago. So it really matters how everyone in Chicago is assessed for your tax bill.
So that's a frustrating thing for most property owners, because they have to wait until the assessment process is complete. They have to wait until the tax rate is then calculated, and that comes from the clerk. So, I mean, it's no wonder we have this complicated system, because it really takes 18 months for you to understand what your tax implications are going to be from an assessment. Let's talk a little bit about appeals. For folks who have a commercial property, someone in the comments was asking, saying that in the past, when they have been reassessed, they have appealed. Maybe they've included things like leases. What are some things that we're looking for from commercial property owners that make for a good appeal?
And I do want to bring in Samantha too, so she can talk about residential appeals and how we, how that factors in with how we do residential valuations. But let's talk about commercial. When we come up with our commercial values, as I said, there's usually a couple of assumptions that we've made about the income generating potential of a property, and then how much the market values that annual income when it determines the value of a property. So we assume things about rent, we assume things about costs, we assume things about maybe other incentives that people might give to get people into a building that are called concessions. We think about occupancy, vacancy. And then we think about that multiple of annual operating income that the market pays to determine how much they're willing to pay to buy property. In any of those areas, we can get those things wrong, including the footage, the size of the property, the dimensions of the property. So when someone is appealing, it's a data-based conversation. It's a data-based inquiry that we want to make. And that a good appeal is really showing us that, hey, you assumed this about my property. That was not appropriate because here's the situation. The footage is different. Or you assume my property was I could get a rent that a Class A property of my kind could get, but I don't have a Class A property. I have a Class C property. So my warehouse, it doesn't get $10 per square foot. It gets $3 per square foot. Those are the kinds of things that make for a good appeal, because it shows that, hey, and this is why we show our assumptions, so that people can really drill down and see, hey, the value that you arrived at is incorrect because of this specific thing, that we can all go out and check with objective data, and then go into this humbly. We acknowledge that we don't have as much information as the property owner has to get it right. And again, we sent out the RPI form, this real property income and expense form, to commercial property owners so that they do not have to face the cost of appealing just to correct us on these basic data issues. A lot of these data issues could be clarified before we send out the assessment if people just show the information to us in advance. So every commercial property owner got this RPI form. And they can send the RPI form to us at no cost, showing that information. And you have to fill out the RPI form when you appeal anyway. So if you think you might be appealing, why not send it to us and to get us at a better starting point? I know some folks, there are many different venues where people can do appeals besides the assessor's office, and they say, well, I'm going to appeal at those venues. But you still will save money if we get that initial assessment right. Reflecting the basic information about your property. So that's why it makes sense. And the people who filled out RPI forms, I think, are glad that they did. And We would love to see more participation from commercial property owners so we can get that right the first time. And the appeals process still exists for them. Everyone has the right to formulate an appeal. You can do it without cost at our office, but unfortunately, it incurs costs to get appraisals and hire people to do that. So we want to save people that cost by getting those basic numbers in place in the first place.
So before we talk about residential appeals, I just want to emphasize you are not required to use an attorney to file an appeal in our office, and there is no cost to file an appeal in our office. Sam, the stuff that we're looking at in terms of residential appeals, I know you're not a valuations analyst, but could you maybe talk about some of the more common things that might drive the residential models? I think there's some very specific things that people ought to be looking at, particularly with the information that we have about their property.
So information about their property, some of the characteristics that we're looking for that helps us to get the value that we start with: square footage, rooms, again, school districts, proximity to certain roles. I think also things like a flood risk, what's going on in the surrounding area, what types of homes are in your neighborhood. All those things help us to identify the assessed value of the property. And again, most of those things are what we can identify from the outside of the property, or that's based on historical data that we have. We can see garages. We might have some information on whether or not a basement is finished or if it isn't. Those are the things that we're looking for that really play a part into understanding the assessed value.
And those things are on the assessment notice somebody gets, right? So that information that we have on your property, they should look at that to determine whether or not we've got that info wrong, and that could be a basis for an appeal.
Absolutely. So how we're looking at appeals is we want residents to be in a place where they can tell us where we have gotten information wrong so we can correct it. When an appeal is filed, our analysts review that to see, okay, here's all the data we have. Here's what you're telling us in the appeal. And then they do some research. And if there is sufficient evidence to really show that the value of the home should change, then the analyst can make that determination. That's really key for the appeals. The appeals is a process for us to get better data to provide a more accurate assessment. And I think we want to make sure that fairness is applied across the board. So when you look at your neighbor's property, if that assessment goes down, your share of taxes goes up. And so the appeals process has been, something that's kind of ingrained in how our county works and what we're looking to do, and how our model works and how we're advancing equity and fairness is to make sure that we're taking in a lot of high quality data to get the value right the first time. And if there are areas where we don't have it right, we don't have good data, go ahead, file an appeal, send us that information, provide us with some evidence, send us pictures, let us know exactly what's going on so we can see, and that helps us really determine the true value of the home and to make that change. And again, I can't emphasize enough two things that we've talked about. One is that to file an appeal with our office is free. And the second thing is that the more information we have, again, the better the better the model performs, the better we can do with that initial assessment value. And that does not mean that your property taxes will necessarily go up. That just means that the value of your home has changed.
So on residential, we have somebody in the chat who had asked, why would my assessment go up 100%? This is probably somebody who maybe hasn't they didn't put a new bedroom on. Maybe, they probably didn't do extensive renovations over the last couple years. What is usually driving an increase like that? What are some of the signals that we're looking for in residential assessments?
Well, I can start with this, and then Samantha, you can build on it. It could be a couple things, because we're looking at an assessment that was calculated by the Barrios administration before we came in using their modeling techniques, and then where we are now. So that's first. There could be a difference in the approach. But also there's the change in the market. House prices have gone up. So Samantha showed you those the charts, and you can go and look in the reports and see how much things have changed. I think homeowners know at a pretty good level to detail what their home would sell for in the market. And that's I think that's the test. What would your home sell for in the market, and then compare with how we came up with it. And if we're coming up with a value that's higher than what you think your home could sell for in the market, that's the kind of thing that really makes for the kind of thing where you do an appeal. But where you can see an assessment doubling on the residential side, it might be from that old assessment was not done properly before, and we have got the market value right now, where there's a combination of market action and correcting for where the previous administration was. So there can be a couple different changes that arise from that. It might arise from you might have made an addition onto the home that we're now able to take into account. In some cases, there can be exemptions that change. So make sure that if you had an exemption on there before and you forgot to apply for the exemption, that's the kind of thing that can change the assessed value as well. So go and make sure that you have all the exemptions that you're entitled to, or if there was a freeze on the exemption before that fell off. Those kinds of things are also something that you take note of.
Right. And Joe, and another important note, I think, to clarify, folks are going to be getting a second installment tax bill very soon through the county. It's important to note that tax bill does not reflect the current assessment. And that tax bill is going to reflect, kind of activity last year. It's going to reflect your assessed value last year. This particular assessment is going to be reflected on next year's second installment tax bill. And I think what most people don't realize is your first installment is 45% of whatever you paid in taxes the previous year. And so the balance of it then goes onto the second installment. So a lot of people look at their first installment, they get a second installment, and they say, why did my taxes go up? And their first thought is assessments. But oftentimes there's something that's changed in the tax rate. There's something that's changed in the amount that their local municipality is levying. Maybe the school's levy went up. Maybe the city raised its levy. There are all these different kind of factors that are push and pull on the tax bill. It's not always the assessment. So it's really important to note that your assessment is just a starting point. And if we do have information that's wrong on the assessment notice, square footage is a big one, number of bedrooms, those are the basis for a residential appeal. It is important to make sure that, you look at that assessment notice, because if there's data wrong on our part, then that is a really good way to make sure that, you're looking at the best possible way to appeal. And again, not necessary to have an attorney, not necessary to pay a cost, regardless of whether you're residential or a commercial property owner. You can have a property held in a trust. You can have a property held in an LLC. You do not need to use an attorney. Now, other other appeals bodies do require an attorney, but at the assessor's office, you can file an appeal without that. So important consideration. Your assessment is one starting point. Folks should pay attention to what unfolds with the rest of the assessment here in Chicago, and looking at different property types, maybe in different areas, and whether their median increase is larger or smaller than some of the other median increases in Chicago, because that'll really be the determiner of whether their assessment is leading to an increase in taxes.
And Scott, I'd say, just building on that, I know a lot of folks here are building expertise in the assessment system, and they're really interested in this. If you want to be a good assessment watchdog, the key things is first of all, on your own property, make sure that the assessment that you're getting is in accordance with the market value that you know your property has. That's first. And then second of all, compare how properties like yours are assessed to make sure that other people like you are being assessed in the same way. But then the third and most important way to be an assessment watchdog is to make sure that we are not under assessing other parts of the city, because that affects you too. Might even affect you more. If you think we're systematically under assessing one kind of property or another, that affects you too. So this is why we put all this data out there in the first place. Not only because for some of us, yes, it's interesting, but also this is about accountability and making sure that the system is fair for you, because we're being focused on market value for every single kind of property out there.
Now, I know we've got a couple of other comments in the chat. They're specific to their types of property or some kind of information they're looking for. And we're going to have members of the assessor's office staff answer those questions. Oftentimes, the best way to do that is to just send us a Facebook message. If you've got a specific question about your property, it's easier for us to resolve it that way rather than in an event like this. But we're going to close out, and I just wanted to kind of toss it to the two of you if you've got any concluding comments. Samantha, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. I just want to emphasize that we absolutely want to mirror the market. We are at a place where we're looking at things that happen historically in government. You stick with things for a long time. There are standards out there that have worked, but we are very much in an age where technology is growing and improving, and our data department is keeping up with all of those pieces of technology and opportunities to improve the model and to make sure our assessments are fair and accurate. And the most helpful thing that we can get from the residents of Rogers Park and all of Cook County is additional data to help ensure that our assessments are fair. We will continue to be transparent and share all that we're doing. And we look forward to ensuring that assessed values, that we become a leader in how it's done.
And Fritz, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think everyone here tonight should remember it's your assessor's office.
That's right.
We serve you, and these assessments are important because the job of the assessment system it's equity. It's dividing up that cost of government amongst all the property owners. And the standard for doing that is market value. And so measure how we're doing are we doing that job well? Are there areas where we're getting it wrong? Or what can be done to improve that? And all of you out there, I know, are good readers, and you can be very attentive and by all means identify the areas where you don't think we got it right, because we walk humbly here. As I said, we're a couple hundred people valuing 1.9 million properties. There are going to be times we don't have all the data, and you can help bring it to us and help us improve it. But know that the assessment system will go very wrong once we start deviating from market values in some areas, because then that's when everything starts to get off kilter. And we're trying to make sure everything's aligned right, so it's a fair system. And that's why when we talk about things like different kinds of property and appeals, the key thing in our mind is making sure that this is equitable. We're keeping things in line with market value for everyone, so that a favor is not conferred to some at the expense of everyone else. So it's really a system that's about equity. It should be. And when it's gone wrong in the past, it leads to inequitable outcomes. So this is why we do things like this. The last thing I wanted to mention is we have so many improvements that we've made for you in your assessor's office that you should give them a try. First of all, go to our website, which is completely new. It's chock full of new tools. We're replacing the whole IT and the hardware and software system of record to give you more information about things like building permits, about the progress of your appeal. You don't have to stand in line at the assessor's office anymore. You can make an appointment and sign up for an online appointment. You can do your appeals and exemptions online now without having to deal with paper. A lot of the exemptions out there automatically renew. We got past automatic renewal. Senior exemption, and there's a couple of other exemptions that automatically renew this year because of the impact of COVID. Folks with disabilities and veterans and the senior Fritz. So I invite everyone to check it out. I know a lot of you are asking questions. Our team is very good at taking questions on social media. We also have a call center. Response times are much improved. So I ask you all to come and check out some of the changes. We've also made an improvement to the look and feel of the assessor's office itself. So when you do make that appointment, you don't have to stand in line anymore. Come by and check it out. So thanks everyone for being there. And Scott, let me hand it off to you.
Well, thanks, Fritz, and thanks, Samantha. I really appreciate you guys taking us through all these reports. Again, those are at cookcountyassessor.com. Go to the data section and then valuation reports. We do have some specific questions in the chat that we're going to reply to. You can always send us a Facebook message if you have a specific question about your assessment or how it relates to your tax bill. You can always send us a Facebook message. We're very responsive there, and we'll get back to those folks. And we will be doing these kinds of events as we roll out the other townships. We're in the midst, as Fritz said, of rolling out a new integrated property tax system. So there have been some delays in getting some of the assessment work out, but we are rolling now, and we intend on getting those out. You'll start to see more of those coming out in the next month. So for now, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Hi, everybody. Thanks.
Everyone.